Hello and welcome to another podcast edition of Taiwan Talk. I'm Keith Manconi. The news is big business here in Taiwan, with 7 24-hour news stations and more than 2,000 newspapers. We're definitely doing okay on the quantity front, but with frequent stories about cute internet videos and dashcam shots of traffic accidents making up a lot of the coverage, the quality and the substance of all this reporting often leaves something to be desired. Well, today on the show, we're going to be speaking to freelance journalist and frequent ICRT contributor Jane Rickards, who took a deep dive into Taiwan's media industry to help explain why it is the way it is, to take a hard look at what's going right, what's going wrong, the good, the bad, and the ugly. She wrote all about what she found in a recent article titled Taiwan's Changing Media Landscape for the March edition of Taiwan Business TOPICS magazine, which is put out by the American Chamber of Commerce in Taipei. I got her in studio to tell us what she came up with. Jane, thanks so much for joining us today.
It's a pleasure, Keith.
So you are a freelancer here in Taiwan. You're covering a lot of stuff, and this report was released on behalf of the American Chamber of Commerce, but the thoughts there are your own. We should be clear about that.
That's right.
Yeah. So we're getting Jane Rickards' unbridled opinions today. Nobody but Jane Rickards. And before we even get into, what this whole article was about, what you found, tell us a little bit about how it was made. I mean, who were you looking for as you were trying to get a sense of what media looks like in Taiwan? Who were you trying to talk to? Who were you trying to understand?
Well, Keith, I was trying to get a broad range of opinions. I spoke to a wide range of people. I spoke to journalism academics. I spoke to a journalism academic from the London School of Oriental and African Studies. I also spoke to a journalism academic based in Taiwan. I also spoke to public relations people, and actually that turned out to be, for me as a journalist, that was the most interesting thing because they understood the media very well, but they were coming at it from the point of view of consumers.
Right, they're on the other team almost.
Yes,
Yeah.
and that was really interesting. And I spoke to journalists, and in particular I was interested about new online media, so I spoke to the CEO of Newslands, and I also spoke to the CEO of Storm Media. All
right, so getting a bird's eye view, very broad picture of the whole scene. Now, your article kind of starts off by setting up a pretty interesting conundrum. On the one hand, Taiwan is frequently rated as one of the most free journalism environments in the whole world, the strongest by many estimations in Asia. But then on the other hand, despite all that freedom, the quality of much of the reporting and journalistic work that we see is just not where we would hope it would be. It's quite poor in some instances. But before we get to that, let's start with the freedom end of things. What is the freedom case here? What is the case for the freeness of Taiwan's media?
Yes, well, I can actually give you updated figures which have emerged since I wrote the story. Reporters Without Borders for 2016 rates Taiwan's media as Asia's freest. It ranks at number 51 in the world among 180 nations, and in comparison, Mongolia is at 54, South Korea is at 70, and Japan is at 72. And China's, of course, is one of the most repressive regimes in the world at 176. So what I'd do is make a point that you talked about Taiwan's freedom versus the fact that a lot of areas where the media can be improved. I'll still point out that it's 51st in the world, right? It's not Finland, which is number 1, or New Zealand, which is number 5, or even the United States, which is number 41, which is sort of ahead of Taiwan by 10 places. So Taiwan obviously still has room to improve. And secondly, I would say that the media is not perfect.
Yeah.
And Freedom House is also has its new figures since I wrote the article. And in the article I said that Freedom House ranked Japan ahead of Taiwan, but in its 2016 ranking it actually ranks Taiwan the same as Japan.
So kind of tying right there.
Yep.
Yeah. All right. Okay. So, room to improve, but compare that, in Taiwan, compare that figure to the actual quality of the reporting, and it doesn't look quite so good. So where's the disconnect there? Tell us a little bit about, broadly speaking, some of the issues that the folks that you spoke to see when they look at the quality of reporting in Taiwan.
Okay, well, the common criticisms were political polarisation. I'm sure everyone's aware of that. Like if you pick up the Liberty Times has a strong so-called pro-green line or pro-independence line.
Right.
China Times is pro-China.
You kind of know what you're going to get as soon as you open those publications.
Yes. And then self-censorship and indirect Chinese influence. And what's particularly interesting, as I'm sure many residents of Taiwan are already aware of this, is that very pro-DPP stations, for example, Sunli television station, critics say that they have bowed to Chinese pressure. Sunli sells many television dramas to China. And in 2012, Sunli axed Big Talk News, or Dahua Xinwen, which was known for its China bashing. So I think many residents, as I said, I'm sure many people are aware of this, but DPP, or so-called green-leaning stations, are not exempt from this.
And the interesting thing here is, people would think there's no Chinese censors that have any say over what happens in Taiwan, but you kind of point out that there's a more subtle way that influence can take shape.
Yes, well, China has an enormous market, and there's a big appetite for Taiwanese television dramas, and like Sunli makes O Shang Ju, which is sort of idol dramas aimed at young people. And to do business in China, the way Chinese society is structured is you must have a good relationship with officials, otherwise it won't happen. So as a result, there have been accusations from critics that Sunli has bowed to Chinese pressure.
Right, so quite a bit of leverage there. Let's focus now on sort of the shape of the market, because you're saying that that's a source of problems too, just the overall competitiveness, how many stations there are, the amount of investment that's going into it. What kind of problems are coming out of that?
Right, well, there's over 200 sort of cable and terrestrial television stations, and what critics said was that there's just so much competition that quality is frequently sacrificed, and the idea is to get viewers' attention. So one professor of journalism at Minchuan University said that over the last 20 years there's been much less investigative reporting on television. It's deteriorating. It's becoming sort of entertainment. Right,
we see all those car chases. We see all of those internet videos of cute animals.
Yes. And basically it's because they're short of funds. So, it's very cheap just to troll social media and come up with a picture of, as you said, a video of cute animals and run that. And that will probably get people's attention. And in a related problem, nearly every foreigner I've spoken to in Taiwan who's been here for a long time talks about parochialism. And that's everywhere. Like, for example, the Australian media is frequently criticised for being parochial as well, but it's especially bad in Taiwan. And that sort of intense competition has been cited, and sort of fragmented nature of the television market. So
very focused on Taiwan,
yes,
not telling us about many stories outside of Taiwan.
Yes, well, you just want to get people's attention.
Yeah.
Right. And then also there's Taiwan's diplomatic isolation that international conferences are being held here, over the last 20 or 30 years. Things like international conferences are held here much less as China's rise. And, if they have to go to one so-called China, they'll go to China. And so that's affecting media consumption here, that people have more parochial thinking.
Right. And kind of interestingly, though, is the fact that there is a huge demand for news here. News remains the most popular form of television, according to your reporting. So why do we see so much market fragmentation? Why is this a problem at all? I mean, if the demand is there, shouldn't it be easy to make good news programming?
I think how it works here is that television penetration's over 80%. It's very high. So a very, very, over 80% of Taiwanese watch television daily. And there's a very strong appetite for news. So there's no incentive for any players to drop out of the race or consolidate. But at the same time, there's no real incentive for them to sort of spend more on quality programming. Yeah, some academics have proposed that Taiwan's public television system, PTS, which was established in 1998, should be upgraded. There should be more government funding for it. So it can offer an alternative to the commercial stations. And their vision is for PTS to become like the BBC. And in Britain, the BBC occupies a very large market share for the news, and it's also a trendsetter. It produces innovative programs, innovative documentaries, innovative dramas. And it sort of can lead the way.
I mean, that's a nice vision, but that would be a long ways off.
Yeah, well, my understanding is that all these legal restrictions and regulatory restrictions which prevent PTS from receiving more funding, even if there was more popular support. And one thing particular to Taiwan, which probably doesn't exist in Britain is that this is once an authoritarian society and the government controlled the media. So I think even the prospect of government intervention in the media in a healthy way wouldn't be so welcome as it would be in other countries.
Right. So one solution that may be a little difficult to broach.
Yeah.
I kind of want to move now to another conundrum that your article raises, that being the fact that on the one hand, we've already kind of hinted at this a little bit, a lot of folks in Taiwan are very worried about the influence of Chinese companies and Chinese media on the media system here in Taiwan. And because of that, there are lots of restrictions on who can invest in what, whether or not Taiwanese media organizations can be owned by Chinese companies. And we've seen examples of that in the last couple of years. But then on the other hand, you're kind of pointing out that some of these restrictions prevent some moves, some evolution that might help reform the media mix here. So tell us a little bit about that.
Right. Well, as most residents of Taiwan probably know, there were lots of student protests after a consortium tried to buy Apple Daily, and one member of the consortium was the son of Tsai Ing-ming, who owns the pro-Beijing China Times, and that caused Jimmy Lai, the owner of Apple Daily, to change his mind and say it wasn't for sale after all. Apple Daily being Taiwan's one of Taiwan's most outspoken newspapers. Now, these student protests also led to calls for anti-media monopoly legislation. And in early 2013, Cabinet approved a draft bill which has since been stalled in the Legislative Yuan. But another interesting thing is that the DPP at the time also proposed a bill calling for the separation of media ownership and media distribution to prevent a sort of concentration of power.
So that would be getting at some of the regulations that we're talking about here. Yes.
No, the DPP's draft bill calls for a separation of ownership of media content and distribution to prevent a concentration of media power. I don't think that affects big media companies throughout the world. What it means is that whoever's providing content will not be allowed to distribute it as well. So they're sort of separate.
Yeah.
But with technology change, with the trend of digital convergence, that might not be possible. So, in other words, the DPP's legislation would be hindering the sort of developments in technology with the media.
All right. Well, let's move to our final topic here and kind of take a look at almost, I guess, a hopeful note in a way that your article raises, the possibility that in some ways Taiwan could become something of a leader in Chinese reporting and journalism around the world. Number of media organizations that you spoke to, looks like they're trying to position themselves to have a little bit of global reach.
Yes, that's true. I spoke to the CEOs of two startups. One is Storm Media and the other is the News Lens. And both of them are not just thinking about Taiwan. They're using Taiwan as a base, but their dream is the greater Chinese market. The News Lens is positioning itself as a publication, an online publication for millennials and those under 40. And their dream is to capture, the entire Greater China market when just running into millions and millions and millions of people, just so much bigger than Taiwan. And Storm Media also wants to sort of capture the Greater China market. So, and it was mentioned to me by a few people that Taiwan could ultimately be a media centre for the Greater Chinese market. Some sources who didn't want to be named told me that, a few managing editors in Hong Kong are sort of hiring bodyguards and that the whole situation in Hong Kong recently has become very, very murky. Jimmy Lai, who owns the Apple Daily in Taiwan and the Apple Daily in Hong Kong, which is a very outspoken newspaper, his house has been firebombed by unknown masked men, as was the headquarters of Next Media, which owns the two papers. That's the umbrella company. So it's very murky, and under this situation, it's possible that more people are going to sort of look to Greater China reporting as coming out of Taiwan. This definitely hasn't happened yet, but Storm Media and News Lens have sort of very long-term vision, and they see Taiwan as a base to sort of reach out to Chinese people all over the world.
So, in some ways kind of leveraging that first attribute of Taiwan's media, its freeness, leveraging that to become more competitive with all these other regions where Chinese content would be consumed.
Yes, that's right. I think with foreign media, English language media, I don't know if that will happen because although China is sort of kicked out New York Times reporters, and there's been issues with Bloomberg researching on the wealth of China's leaders. And most recently, The Economist has been banned in China because of a picture they had of Xi Jinping on the front page.
Yeah.
It's sort of about personality cults, I believe. Despite that, I think that the foreign media will still do what it does in China. As far as I can see, I don't think Taiwan will be a centre for English language media, but I think it could be a different story with Chinese language media because Taiwan has a free environment for Chinese speakers, which is increasingly shrinking in Hong Kong.
So, bit of an opportunity there, maybe a path forward.
Yeah.
All right. Well, on that note, we're going to wrap things up there. The article, once again, was Taiwan's Changing Media Landscape. You can find that in the March edition of Topics magazine, out from the American Chamber of Commerce in Taiwan. And its author, who is with us in studio right now and we've been talking to, is, once again, Taiwan freelancer Jane Rickards. Jane, thanks so much for joining us today.
Thank you, Keith.
Thanks for listening to another podcast edition of Taiwan Talk. Taiwan Talk is, of course, ICRT's weekly interview segment, bringing you conversations from and about Taiwan. You can catch the broadcast every Monday at 8 a.m. and 6 p.m., right after the top-of-the-hour newscast. You can also find it online at the ICRT website, on iTunes, the app. We've also started posting to the ICRT blog. Please do leave a comment on the blog while you're there. We would love to hear what you thought of the show or about any of the news stories that we're covering. Were we too harsh on Taiwan's media? Is there something that you really like about it? Would love to hear your perspective there. For the latest on everything that ICRT is doing, you can follow us on Twitter. We tweet from @ICRT News for our news stuff, at ICRT 100 for music and programming and all that good stuff. And I tweet myself at Keith Menconi. You can get the latest on everything that's going on right on there. That is it for the show. Thank you for listening. For ICRT and Taiwan Talk, I'm Keith Menconi. See you next time.